Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. According to Wednesday, August 6 spoilers for The Young and the Restless, Jack Abbott receives a surprise request, and Claire Newman will be shocked by Kyle Abbott's confession. First, Nikki Newman will have a crucial conversation with Jack on Wednesday's YNR episode. It turns out that Nikki will approach Jack soon in the hopes that he will be willing to perform her a favor. Jack will pay attention to Nikki's specific request, which might be related to the argument between Claire and Victor Newman. In the interim, Nikki might implore Jack to avoid upsetting Victor because she wants to mend the rift in her family. However, it's possible that Nikki would ask Jack to speak with Kyle and persuade him to encourage Claire to make peace. Since Nikki is aware that Claire respects Kyle's viewpoint, she might believe that Kyle is the most qualified one to soothe Claire. Naturally, Kyle has already advised Claire to remain calm and take a step back, but Claire has already decided to stand up to Victor. Kyle will decide it's time to be honest now that Claire is prepared to move forward with living together. According to YNR spoilers, Kyle is expected to reveal the truth about what transpired in Nice during his confession. Kyle might not reveal every last detail, of course. It's probable that Kyle will omit the bit about wearing a towel and falling on the bed with Audra. Kyle might, however, at least confess to kissing Audra and exposing the seduction plot she was executing for Victor. You can bet that Claire will be even more incensed over Victor going to such lengths to end her connection with Kyle. Since Claire will be so repulsed by Victor and Audra, it appears that Kyle will get away with his own inappropriate behavior behind closed doors. In relation to Audra, she will be unable to persuade Victor to stop financing Vibrante. Audra will eventually depart in a rage and fret about what comes next because, from Victor's perspective, the game is over. Keep an eye out for Claire's impending encounter with Audra, as spoilers for The Young and the Restless indicate that Kyle will provide her with updates on all the startling news from France. Kyle's confession stunned Claire, leaving her breathless as the weight of his words settled heavily between them. The air in the room grew thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity as she struggled to process what he had just revealed. Her hands trembled slightly, fingers tightening around the edge of the table as if grounding herself in the physical world might help her make sense of the emotional earthquake that had just shaken her to her core. She had always thought she knew Kyle, knew his secrets, his fears, the unspoken truths that lingered behind his carefully constructed smiles. But this was something else entirely. His voice had been steady, almost detached, as if he had rehearsed the words 1,000 times in his head before finally letting them escape into the open. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, she could see the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched ever so slightly, bracing for her reaction. Claire had no idea what to say. The confession was so far removed from anything she had ever expected that it left her mind reeling, scrambling for some semblance of understanding or, at the very least, a coherent response. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, the words dissolving before they could form. Kyle didn't rush her. He simply waited, his gaze never leaving hers, as if he knew she needed time to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the truth he had just laid bare. The silence between them was deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic outside and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, a cruel reminder that life continued to move forward even as hers felt irrevocably altered. Meanwhile, Jack's special request lingered in the back of Claire's mind, an unwelcome distraction that only added to the chaos swirling inside her. Jack had always been the one to ask for the impossible, to push boundaries with that effortless charm of his, making it nearly impossible to refuse him. But this time, his request had been different, more personal, more complicated. It wasn't just about favors or professional courtesies, it was about something deeper, something that tugged at emotions Claire wasn't sure she was ready to confront. She had promised to think about it, to give him an answer when she could, but now, with Kyle's confession hanging between them like a storm cloud, Jack's request felt like another layer of weight pressing down on her already overwhelmed heart. She couldn't help but wonder if the two things were connected, if fate had conspired to bring these two pivotal moments crashing into her life at the same time, testing her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Kyle shifted slightly, the movement drawing Claire's attention back to him. His expression was unreadable now, the vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier carefully tucked away behind a mask of quiet resolve. He had always been good at that, hiding his true feelings, retreating behind walls when things got too intense. It was one of the things that had drawn her to him in the first place, that enigmatic quality that made him so intriguing. But now, it frustrated her. She needed, to see the raw honesty she had heard in his voice reflected in his eyes, needed to know that this wasn't just another calculated move in whatever game he thought they were playing. "Say something," he finally murmured, the words barely above a whisper, yet they carried the weight of a plea. Claire swallowed hard, her throat dry. What could she say? That she understood? That she forgave him? That nothing had changed? None of those things would be true, and Kyle deserved more than hollow reassurances. Jack's request resurfaced in her thoughts, an unwelcome intrusion. He had asked for her trust, for her to take a leap of faith without knowing where she would land. At the time, it had seemed like a simple decision, complicated, yes, but not impossible. Now, though, it felt like just another demand on her already fractured emotions. How was she supposed to give Jack what he wanted when she could barely make sense of her own feelings about Kyle's confession? The timing was cruel, almost laughably so, as if the universe had decided to test her limits all at once. She exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself, but the storm inside her refused to calm. Kyle was still watching her, his patience unwavering, but she could see the faintest hint of doubt creeping into his expression, the fear that he had made a mistake in telling her. That look, more than anything, broke through the numbness that had settled over her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted at last, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, raw and unpolished, and she saw Kyle's shoulders tense slightly at the admission. I need time. Time to process, time to untangle the mess of emotions knotting inside her chest, time to figure out where they went from here. Kyle nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response, but the flicker of disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. He had hoped for more, for understanding, for acceptance, maybe even for absolution. But Claire couldn't give him that, not yet. Not when everything still felt so uncertain. The silence stretched between them again, heavy and suffocating, until finally, Kyle pushed back from the table and stood. "I'll give you space," he said quietly, his voice carefully neutral. Claire wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, to demand that they talk this through until they found some kind of resolution. But the words stuck in her throat, and before she could force them out, Kyle was already turning away. She watched as he walked toward the door, his footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet room, each one feeling like another step further away from the life they had built together. And then he was gone, the soft click of the door closing behind him echoing in Claire's ears like a gunshot. She sat there, frozen, staring at the empty space where he had been, her mind racing yet strangely blank at the same time. Jack's request came back to her once more, this time with a sharp clarity that made her chest ache. She had been so focused on Kyle's confession that she had almost forgotten about it, but now it loomed large in her thoughts, demanding attention. Jack had asked for something that could change everything, for her, for him, maybe even for Kyle. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, caught between two men who had, in their own ways, turned her world upside down in the span of a single day. She had always prided herself on being decisive, on knowing what she wanted and going after it without hesitation. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt utterly lost. The hours passed in a blur, the sunlight fading into dusk as Claire remained at the table, lost in thought. She replayed Kyle's words over and over in her mind, searching for some hidden meaning, some clue that would make everything make sense. But the more she thought about it, the more tangled her emotions became. Part of her wanted to be angry, angry that he had kept this from her for so long, angry that he had dropped it on her so suddenly, angry that he had left instead of staying to fight for them. But another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, just felt sad. Sad for the pain he must have been carrying alone, sad for the distance that had grown between them without her even realizing it, sad for the uncertain future that now stretched before them. And then there was Jack. His request had been unexpected, but not entirely surprising. There had always been something unspoken between them, a tension that neither of them had ever fully acknowledged. Now, with his words out in the open, Claire couldn't pretend it didn't exist anymore. But was it fair to even consider it when her relationship with Kyle was hanging by a thread? Was it fair to Kyle? To herself? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more unanswerable than the last. She knew she couldn't avoid making a decision forever, but for now, all she could do was sit with the weight of it all, letting the emotions wash over her until, eventually, exhaustion pulled her under. When she finally dragged herself to bed, the room was dark and silent, the events of the day replaying in her mind like a broken record. Kyle's confession, Jack's request, they were two separate storms colliding inside her, leaving destruction in their wake. She didn't know what the morning would bring, didn't know how she would face either of them when the time came. All she knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. And as she closed her eyes, the last thought that flickered through her mind was a quiet, desperate hope that somehow, someway, she would find the strength to navigate the wreckage and come out on the other side. But for now, in the stillness of the night, all she could do was wait. Claire had been walking through the Abbott estate garden, soaking in the early morning calm, unaware that her entire world was about to shift. The soft breeze barely moved the hanging petals of the white roses, but something in the air felt heavy, like a secret lingering too long. Kyle found her by the arbor, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes shadowed with something unspoken. Claire turned at the sound of his footsteps, offering a faint smile, expecting small talk or maybe an update about Harrison. But Kyle didn't smile back. He just stared at her like he was memorizing the moment before everything shattered. "We need to talk," he said, voice low but urgent, the kind of tone that precedes bad news. Claire's heart tightened immediately. She'd learned to recognize that edge in Genoa City, a storm was coming. Kyle glanced away, drawing in a shaky breath, then finally met her gaze. "It's about the night of the fire, and what I did afterward." Claire stiffened. That fire had changed so much. It was the beginning of chaos, of secrets buried and lives uprooted. Kyle had always been by her side since then, supportive, even kind, but she'd never asked what it cost him. "I didn't tell you everything," he continued, stepping closer, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "There was a moment, right after the blaze, when I saw you, unconscious, bleeding, barely breathing, and I panicked. But I didn't call 911. I didn't do the right thing, not immediately." Claire blinked, unable to process what she was hearing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Kyle looked down. "I called Victor first. I knew he'd know how to control the situation. I thought protecting the family meant hiding what really happened. I moved things. I made it look accidental." Her breath caught. Claire stumbled back a step, memories flashing, waking up in the hospital, everyone treating her like a victim, not a liability. She'd asked questions. The answers had always been neat, curated. Now she knew why. "You staged the scene?" she asked, trembling. "Why?" Kyle's face twisted with guilt. "Because I thought you started the fire. Or at least, that you were responsible. I didn't want you to go to prison. I didn't want Harrison to lose you. But it wasn't just about you. It was about the family. About Jack. About Diane. About what people would say if they knew the truth, that you were near the room where the evidence was being kept. Claire backed away slowly, her pulse racing. The man she trusted had made a life-altering decision for her, based on fear. Based on lies. But I didn't start it, she whispered. Kyle nodded. I know that now. I found the surveillance footage weeks later. It proved you were innocent. But by then, I'd already lied to the police. I'd given them my statement. I made them believe it was an accident. And I couldn't undo it without incriminating myself. Claire's throat tightened. So you just let me think it was a mystery? Let me feel like I was broken, that I'd caused everything? Kyle looked shattered. I didn't know how to tell you. I kept waiting for the right time. But there never was one. The silence was unbearable. The garden suddenly felt suffocating. Claire turned, unable to look at him, and walked quickly back to the house. Her mind was spinning. She didn't even know where she was going until she opened the library doors and saw Jack sitting quietly, sipping coffee and flipping through a photo album. He looked up in surprise. Claire? She didn't answer, just collapsed into the chair across from him, eyes wide, hands trembling. Jack closed the album and leaned forward. What is it? Claire shook her head, trying to calm herself. Kyle. He just told me he covered up the truth about the fire. He thought I did it. He staged the scene. Lied to the police. Jack let out a slow, painful sigh, like he'd suspected the truth all along. He set down his coffee, stood, and walked to the window. I asked him not to tell you. Claire's head snapped up. You knew? Jack nodded solemnly. Not everything. But I knew enough. After the fire, Kyle came to me. He was terrified. I didn't want him to carry the burden alone, so I helped manage things behind the scenes. I thought we were protecting you. Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. You let me believe I'd done something terrible. You both did. Jack turned, his expression gentle but firm. Claire, you were fragile. You'd been through trauma. I didn't want to risk pushing you over the edge. We made a call, maybe the wrong one, but it came from love. You were part of this family. Her eyes welled up. Then why does it feel like betrayal? Jack stepped toward her. Because we didn't trust you with the truth. And for that, I am sorry. But that's why I wanted to speak to you today, before Kyle did. I have a request. A favor. A chance to do things differently this time. Claire narrowed her eyes, unsure if she could hear another secret. What kind of request? Jack took a deep breath. I want you to go to LA. There's someone there who's asking questions about the fire, someone Victor thinks is tied to Tucker. He's sniffing around old files, old rumors. I need someone I can trust to find out what he knows and stop him before he drags this family back into scandal. I wanted Kyle to go, but after everything, I think it has to be you. Claire stared at him, stunned. You want me to clean up your mess? Jack didn't flinch. No. I want you to take back control. I want you to uncover the truth about what started the fire, who really planted the evidence, and whether it all ties back to Tucker's old vendettas. We've all been played. I think you're the only one who can outsmart them now. Claire crossed her arms, torn between fury and purpose. You're asking me to lie, to manipulate, to spy. Jack nodded. If that's what it takes to protect this family, yes. She let out a bitter laugh. After all this, you still think I owe you loyalty? Jack's voice softened. Not loyalty. But maybe closure. Maybe redemption. Not just for you, for Kyle. For all of us. Claire hesitated. She had every reason to walk away, to let the Abbotts burn in their own deception. But something inside her, maybe the part that still believed in justice, was curious. If Tucker or someone else really orchestrated everything, maybe the fire was just a piece of a larger game. Maybe the Abbotts were just pawns. Maybe she could expose it. I'll think about it, she said finally. Jack nodded. That's all I can ask. Claire left the room, but as she reached the hallway, she saw Kyle again. He was leaning against the wall, clearly waiting, eyes swollen from regret. Claire, he started, but she held up a hand. Not now. I don't forgive you. Not yet. But I'm not walking away, either. Kyle's face twisted with both hope and grief. You shouldn't have had to carry this. I'm so sorry. She nodded once, curtly. You should be. Then she walked past him, not looking back, each step echoing like a drumbeat of change. The Abbott family was unraveling from the inside, one confession at a time. And Claire wasn't sure who she was anymore, a victim, a survivor, or the next player in a game much bigger than she'd ever imagined. But one thing was clear, the truth had been buried too long, and whether Jack liked it or not, she was going to dig it up, starting in LA.